Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. So it's finally here. That ban list that we've all been waiting for is apparently going to be coming out tomorrow, Saturday. Kind of a weird day for a ban list, especially since it's going to be not in the middle of a YCS, but I guess that it is cool that it's being tied into the whole Master Duel event. Anyways, we haven't really had that much happening with the market the last couple of weeks, which is why I haven't really been uploading anything. But once the list does drop, you can definitely bet that Tom and I will be back to uploading a ton of content for you all as things change with the new format. For today's episode, we're taking a look at a few different banned cards that some players are speculating may potentially come off of the ban list, as they do with every single list that comes out. And we're going to talk a little bit about how realistic I think those changes and things actually could be. Let's get started. First up, we're talking about everyone's favorite card to discuss around the ban list season. It is Maxx. So this is definitely a format defining card, allowing the player who activates it to draw a card every time the opponent special summons this turn. This card is at 3 in the OCG, but banned in the TCG, and I think it single-handedly is the card that makes the TCG and OCG basically different games. Yes, there are ways to play around or through this card, but the fact that this card exists in the OCG changes the way that players get to do things. Now, personally, I don't think that this card will ever be unbanned in the TCG. It would just change too many things about the game fundamentally. However, there are a couple of things I want to note about the card. The first is that this time around, there has been less people talking about Maxx compared to ban list seasons in the past. I think because of the new Mulch Army cards, they allow you to draw when your opponent summons as well, but obviously in a much more limited and restricted and definitely more balanced sort of way. I think that the unbanning of Maxx would just hurt the sales of current products because the Mulch Armies would look so much less desirable, so that doesn't really make sense for Maxx to be unbanned. The other thing to note is that Maxx is getting a reprint in the Speed Duel box, which is the last one coming out before Speed Duels are put on hold, but those versions can still be used in Time Wizard events here in the TCG. Now, the card should get both a secret rare printing that could sometimes be pulled, and then a common printing that would be in every single box. This has brought the price down of the lower end versions of Maxx, as commons, supers, and gold rares have mostly been around $15 to $20 in the past, but they're already now down to $10 each. Obviously, the original secret rares and then ultimate rares are mostly unaffected by these news, but it is worth noting that the reprint is coming just in case you need to pick up a copy of this card in order to build a specific Time Wizard format deck. Up next, we're looking at a couple of cards that I've seen some more hype for recently, starting off with Spright Elf. Now, this is a card that was banned back when we saw the slaughter of Tearlaments a couple of years ago. It's a Link 2 that requires one of its materials to be a level, rank, or Link 2 monster. It stops monsters that it points to from being targeted, and it has a quick effect to special summon a level, rank, or Link 2 monster from your graveyard. So I think the reason that players are speculating about this card is that it's like a recent hit that feels unnecessary given the power creep that we've seen with the game recently. Before, there were two decks that were using this card. The first was Tearlaments, which used it to special summon back Merly and mill cards on your opponent's turn. The other one was Runic Spright, which could abuse the Spright cards since they're all level 2, or it could revive something like Iperia to allow you to draw cards. Now, obviously, Tear isn't a big threat anymore, and Spright Runic is mostly phased out of the game, though I could see Runic being hit on the upcoming list as well. I'm not saying that this card wouldn't be any good. It would still be one of the best Link 2s in the game today, but I don't think it would be completely oppressive or anything like that. On top of that, this card is still currently unbanned on Master Duel as well. Obviously, the game doesn't really translate to the TCG, but it might be something familiar that helps players migrate to the TCG. The interesting thing here is that all of this seems to be a common sentiment amongst a lot of players. Spright Elf, since being banned, has sat at around $3 to $5, as it does have just the one printing as an ultra rare in Power of the Elements. However, over the last month or so, we've actually seen this card climb in price steadily, and it now sits at around the $10 to $12 mark, so basically doubling in price. Certainly an interesting card to keep an eye on. I feel like this is the type of card that you should always own a couple copies of, because it could theoretically be unbanned at any time. Alright, now this is a card that I've seen an almost silly number of players talking about recently. It's Kashtira Arise-Heart. So I don't know exactly what it is that happened. Maybe there's a fake ban list floating around that unbans this card, but for some reason a bunch of players have gotten it in their heads that Kashtira Arise-Heart may be unbanned this upcoming list. And to me, that's just an absolutely ridiculous sounding idea. This card is literally one of the most broken extra deck monsters ever printed, as a walking macrocosmos that can quick effect banish cards face down, and on top of that it basically gets endless materials. I mean, theoretically, right, like Kashtira isn't really a relevant deck right now, but I think that that's because Arise-Heart is basically what made the deck good. I don't know, we've just seen a bunch of players posting that they were looking to pick this card up, and it really doesn't make much sense to me at all. This card was only ever printed in Photon Hypernova, but we have actually seen some pretty notable movement in the price of both versions of the card. The secret rares used to be relatively cheap, around $6 to $8. The card is now up to $11, so a small bump up there. The really noticeable increase, however, has been with the Starlight rares. They were down at $65 to $70, but they're now actually up to between $110 to $120, which is a very notable bump up, especially when we do see a ton of sales recently right around that $100 mark. But yeah, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I think that Arise-Heart is something that should literally never come back into the game. That said, holding on to copies of Arise-Heart is definitely a high risk, but potentially high reward play. On to another fan favorite. Here's one that gets talked about every single ban list. It's Heavy Metal Foe's Electromite. So one of my buddies literally is like praying for this card to come off every single ban list, but it never does. This card is a really good card for basically any Pendulum strategy. It places a Pendulum monster from your deck to your extra deck face up, setting up a Pendulum summon, or setting up its next effect, which lets you pop a card and then add a face up Pendulum monster in your extra deck to your hand, and then if a card in your Pendulum zone leaves the field, you get to draw a card as well. Now this card is literally like the best Pendulum card that has ever been printed, and it would be a big thing for Pendulums if it did ever come back. But really, I don't think it ever will, and I don't think that because it would make Pendulums really good or even slightly meta relevant, because they would probably still be a rogue deck, but I think that because it literally streamlines all of the different Pendulum decks into the same strategy. Get 2 Pendulum monsters onto the field, make Electromite, and then see where you get to go from there. Before Electromite was banned, any deck that wanted to use Pendulum monsters basically had to run like Dark Worm, Dragon Shrine, Curtain Raiser, a bunch of other cards that just did whatever they could to get 2 Pendulums onto the board so that you could make Electromite, and that was it. But at the very least now, different Pendulum decks go about executing their strategies a little bit differently. Anyways, we haven't seen any ridiculously crazy price movement with this card. The card has 2 secret rare printings, the original from Extreme Force and the other one from the tins. They were around $8 to $10 each before, especially because with each of the previous ban lists, we've always seen this card see a little bit of hype. The card is now up to $15 per copy for either version of the card, with the hype for the recent ban list now. The argument for the card being unbanned is that it's still unbanned in the OCG, so it could come back to 1 here without much consequence, but I still don't think that that's very likely to happen. So yeah, I do think that this is another one that you're going to be stuck holding on to for a very long time unless you decide that you randomly want to play it in a certain Time Wizard format. And finally, we're on to the last card for this video, and yes, I know we're only talking about 5 cards, but I really don't have too much to go over with you guys until after the ban list. We're talking about Heavy Storm. So of all the cards that players are expecting to get unbanned, I do think that Heavy Storm is the most realistic of them all. This card destroys all spell and traps on both players' side of the field. It used to be a crazy card, especially in something like GOAT or Edison format. However, I think that this card would arguably not see too much play in today's format. Right now we have Feather Duster, which hits just your opponent's back row, as well as Lightning Storm, which can potentially hit your opponent's attack position monsters as well. This means that a lot of the time Heavy Storm would only be your 4th best option to wipe out all of your opponent's back row, which could still be really strong, but not exactly game-breaking. I believe that Heavy Storm is legal in the OCG, and it's not a problem card over there. I know that before players talked about how you could proc the effects of your own cards by destroying them with Heavy Storm. I can't really think of anything too crazy that you could do in the current format that could really make use of this card, aside from maybe like the Unchained trap cards. That said, I could definitely see Heavy Storm peeling off of the next list. With this card, it has several different holo printings, including Supers, Ultras, and the Gold Rares. All of those printings are going to be around $8 to $10, obviously more for something like a Metal Raiders 1st edition copy. And then it also has a ton of different common printing since it came in a bunch of old starter and structure decks. Those versions are going to cost you about $2 each. Now, even if this card does get unbanned, I think that there's just too many copies of this card running around on the market for any version to really get too expensive. So with this card, I'd just grab a copy that you are okay with playing yourself and hold on to that until this card eventually gets unbanned. Alright guys, that is all we have for today's episode. I know I'm really excited to see this upcoming ban list as well. I hope that they have a ton of changes. I think it's going to be another big list where they have like 25 different changes for the 25th anniversary of Yu-Gi-Oh! So fingers crossed that that's going to be great. And of course, we're going to have a ton of ban list related content for you guys in the upcoming week. And then we have Worlds next weekend as well, which I am super excited about. Anyways, guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch, please make sure you let me know by hitting that thumbs up button. Make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.